I'm Lila, and the day my parents emptied my $30,000 savings account to pay off my brother's gambling debts, they told me I was selfish for crying about it. I was 24, living in a cramped apartment in Portland, working 2 jobs to build a future I could call my own. That money was my lifeline, every late-night shift at the diner, every freelance graphic design gig, every skipped coffee date poured into that account. It was my promise to myself that I'd escape the weight of my family's expectations, the suffocating small town in Oregon where I grew up, and the constant reminder that I was never enough. But in one phone call, it was gone. My mother's voice was sharp, unyielding, as she said, "Lila, family comes first. You'll earn it back. Stop being so dramatic." My father didn't even bother to speak. I sat on my thrift store couch, staring at the peeling paint on my wall, feeling like the ground had vanished beneath me. I grew up in Cloverdale, a place where the sky feels too big and the opportunities too small. My parents owned a hardware store, the kind with dusty shelves and a bell that jingled when customers walked in. It was the heart of their world, and my older brother Ethan was its heir. He was charming with a smile that could sell rusted nails as treasures. I was the quiet one, the girl who sketched in notebooks and dreamed of cities I'd never seen. Ethan was allowed to fail skipping school, crashing cars, racking up debts because he was the son, the one who'd carry the family name. I was expected to be perfect, straight A's, no complaints, no dreams too big to fit in Cloverdale. My mother would say, "Lila, don't be so ambitious. It's not ladylike." My father would nod his silence louder than her words. The savings account started when I was 16, working weekends at the local bakery. I'd hide half my paycheck in a shoebox under my bed, terrified my parents would find it and demand I contribute to the family. They never asked Ethan for a dime, even when he dropped out of college and started gambling. By the time I was 22, I'd moved to Portland, enrolled in community college, and opened a real bank account. Every deposit felt like a rebellion, a brick in the wall I was building between me and Cloverdale. I wasn't just saving money, I was saving myself. I wanted to transfer to a 4-year university, maybe even study abroad. I wanted to prove I was more than the good daughter who existed to clean up Ethan's messes. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening after a 12-hour shift at the diner. My feet ached, my hands smelled of grease, and I was dreaming of a hot shower when my phone buzzed. It was my mother, her voice clipped like she was reading from a script. "Lila, we needed your savings. Ethan's in trouble again. The bank was going to take the store if we didn't pay off his debts." I froze, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. "My savings," I whispered. "You took my money." She sighed as if I were a child, throwing a tantrum. "It's not your money, Lila. It's the family's. You're young. You'll earn more." I asked how much. "All of it," she said. 30,000. I don't remember hanging up. I just remember the sound of my own sobbing, raw and jagged, filling the apartment. I called my father next, hoping he'd explain, maybe even apologize. He didn't. "You've always been ungrateful," he said. "Ethan's trying to get better. Why can't you support him?" Ungrateful. The word burned into me like a brand. I'd spent my life trying to please them, staying quiet when they praised Ethan's half-hearted efforts, nodding when they dismissed my dreams, working myself to exhaustion to avoid being a burden. And now I was ungrateful for losing everything I'd built. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the floor, my laptop open, staring at my bank account balance, $12.47. The dreams I'd stitched together, college travel freedom, unraveled in front of me. The next morning I called the bank, hoping it was a mistake. The teller was kind but firm. "Your parents are co-signers on the account," she said. "They had full access. I'd added them when I was 18. Too naive to understand what it meant. I wanted to scream, to demand my money back, but there was no one to fight. My parents weren't villains in a movie. They were just people who believed Ethan's future mattered more than mine. I walked to the diner in a daze, my apron still stained from the night before. my coworker Marisol noticed my red eyes and pulled me into the break room. "What happened, Lila?" she asked. I told her everything, the words, spilling out like water from a broken dam. She didn't say much, just hugged me and handed me a tissue. "You're stronger than they know," she whispered. I didn't believe her, not then. For weeks, I moved through my life like a ghost. I'd go to work, attend classes, smile when someone asked how I was. But inside, I was hollow. The betrayal wasn't just about the money, it was about what it represented. My parents had chosen Ethan again, without a second thought. They'd taken my sacrifice and called it my duty. I stopped calling home. My mother left voicemails, her tone growing sharper with each one. "Lila, you're being childish. We're a family. You need to let this go." I deleted them without replying. Ethan sent a single text, "Sorry, sis, I'll pay you back." I didn't respond. I knew he wouldn't. I started skipping classes, too exhausted to focus. My grades slipped, and my advisor warned me I'd lose my partial scholarship if I didn't improve. The diner cut my hours, and my freelance clients dried up. I was drowning, and the worst part was feeling like I deserved it. Maybe I was ungrateful. Maybe I was selfish for wanting something of my own. I'd lie awake at night, replaying my parents' words, wondering if I'd been wrong to believe I could be more. The world felt heavy, like it was pressing me into the ground, and I didn't know how to push back. One evening, I wandered into a used bookstore near my apartment, desperate for a distraction. The owner, an older woman named Ruth, was closing up, but let me in. She had silver hair and eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You look like you need a good story," she said, handing me a worn copy of Jane Eyre. I laughed, bitter. "I'm living a bad one." She didn't push, just offered me tea and a chair. I don't know why, but I told her everything, my parents. Ethan, the money, the word ungrateful that haunted me. Ruth listened, her face soft but not pitying. "You're not ungrateful," she said. "You're human, and humans fight for what matters to them." Ruth became my anchor. She'd let me sit in the bookstore after hours reading or sketching while she sorted inventory. She'd tell me stories of her own life, leaving an abusive marriage, starting over in her 40s, building the bookstore from nothing. "You don't need their permission to matter," she told me one night. "You decide your worth." Her words were like a match in the dark, small, but enough to see by. I started sketching again, pouring my anger and hurt into charcoal and ink. I drew jagged lines, broken houses' faces, half hidden in shadow. It wasn't art to sell, it was art to survive. I went back to class, clawing my way through assignments. Marisol helped me pick up extra shifts at the diner, and I started applying for new freelance gigs. It wasn't about the money anymore, it was about proving I could stand up again. I'd work until 2 a.m., my hands cramped from drawing, my eyes burning from staring at screens. Every small win, a paid invoice, a passing grade, felt like a defiance. I wasn't just rebuilding my savings, I was rebuilding myself. But the wound was still there, raw and aching. I'd see families at the diner laughing together and feel a pang so sharp it stole my breath. I wanted to hate my parents, but I couldn't. I just wanted them to see me. The months that followed were a blur of survival each day, a battle to keep moving forward. I'd wake up to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking the thin walls of my apartment, doing little to muffle the noise. My alarm clock, a cheap thing I'd bought at a thrift store, would buzz relentlessly until I dragged myself out of bed. The mirror in my bathroom was cracked, and every morning I'd catch my reflection, pale with shadows under my eyes, that seemed to grow darker with each passing week. I looked like someone who was holding on by a thread, and maybe I was. But I was holding on. Work became my lifeline. At the diner, I'd tie my apron with a kind of grim determination, forcing smiles for customers who barely noticed me. Marisol was a constant presence, her laughter cutting through the grease-scented air like a burst of sunlight. She'd nudge me when I got too quiet, slipping me an extra slice of pie, or telling me stories about her own chaotic family. My mom once sold my bike to buy my cousin a prom dress. She said one slow afternoon, wiping down the counter. Family, right? They love you, but they'll bleed you dry. I nodded, the ache in my chest, loosening just a little. Marisol didn't try to fix me. She just made me feel less alone. My evenings were spent at Ruth's bookstore, which had become my sanctuary. The smell of old paper and lavender tea was a balm soothing the raw edges of my heart. Ruth never pried, but she had a way of asking questions that made me want to talk. "What do you want, Lila?" she asked one night, her hands sorting through a box of yellowed paperbacks. I hesitated, my sketchbook open on my lap charcoal, smudging my fingers. "I want to be enough," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me, her eyes sharp and kind. "You already are. You just need to believe it." Her words stayed with me like a song I couldn't stop humming. I started sketching more, not just to vent my pain, but to create something new. I drew women with fierce eyes, their faces half lit by stars, their hands reaching for things just out of sight. I drew landscapes that felt like dream cities of glass forests of shadow rivers that flowed upward. Ruth would peek at my work and smile, saying, "You've got a fire in you, Lila. Don't let anyone snuff it out." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I wanted to. I started posting my sketches online on a whim, using a free portfolio site. I didn't expect anyone to care, but a few people did, strangers leaving comments like, "This feels alive," or "I see myself in this." It was small, but it was mine. School was harder. My grades had taken a hit, and I was on academic probation. My advisor, a tired woman named Ms. Carter, called me into her office one gray morning. "Lila, you're slipping," she said, her voice not unkind but firm. "You've got potential, but you need to show up." I wanted to tell her about my parents, about the $30,000, about the weight of being called ungrateful, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I nodded, promising to do better. I started studying at the diner during slow shifts. My textbooks spread out on the counter, Marisol quizzing me on art history terms between coffee refills. I'd stay up until dawn, rewriting essays, memorizing dates, forcing my brain to focus despite the exhaustion. Money was tight. My savings were gone, and my diner wages barely covered rent and groceries. I'd eat instant noodles most nights, telling myself it was temporary. I applied for every scholarship I could find, filling out forms until my eyes blurred. Most were long shots, but I had nothing to lose. I also took on more freelance work designing logos and social media graphics for small businesses. The pay was inconsistent, but every dollar felt like a victory. I opened a new bank account, one my parents couldn't touch, and watched the balance grow $50, then $200, then $500. It wasn't $30,000, but it was mine. I hadn't spoken to my parents in months. Their voicemails had stopped, replaced by an occasional text from my mother, "Call us Lila." "This is ridiculous." I didn't. Ethan sent another message, promising again to pay me back, but I deleted it. The silence from Cloverdale was both a relief and a wound. I missed them, my mother's rare laughter, my father's quiet pride when I'd fix something in the store, even Ethan's stupid jokes. But I couldn't go back, not yet. I wasn't ready to face the people who'd taken so much and called it love. One night, Ruth invited me to a local art show, a small event in a community center downtown. "Just come," she said, handing me a flyer. "You don't have to show your work. Just see what's out there." I went feeling out of place in my thrift store jacket, among people who seemed to know exactly who they were. The art was raw, unpolished paintings of grief, sculptures of hope, drawings that felt like screams. I wandered the room, my heart pounding, realizing I wasn't just a girl who'd lost everything. I was a girl who could create something. A woman approached me, her hair streaked with purple, her earrings glinting in the dim light. "You're Lila, right?" she said. I blinked, confused. "Ruth's friend, I saw your sketches online. They're haunting." Her name was Tara, a local artist who ran a collective for young creatives. She asked if I'd ever considered showing my work. I laughed nervous, saying I wasn't ready. "You're readier than you think," she said, handing me her card. I tucked it into my pocket, my hands trembling, with something I hadn't felt in months possibility. Back at the bookstore, I told Ruth what happened. She grinned, pouring me more tea. "See, the world's bigger than Cloverdale, Lila. You're starting to find your place in it." I wanted to believe her, but doubt clung to me like damp clothes. What if I failed? What if I wasn't good enough? That night I sketched until my fingers ached, drawing a woman standing on a cliff, her hair whipping in the wind, her eyes fixed on a horizon she couldn't yet reach. It was me, or who I wanted to be. The next week I met Tara for coffee. She talked fast, her hands gesturing wildly, describing the collective's upcoming showcase. "We need new voices," she said. "Yours could be one of them." I hesitated, my stomach twisting. My sketches were personal raw. Exposing them felt like standing naked in a crowd. But Tara's enthusiasm was infectious, and I agreed to submit a few pieces. I spent days agonizing over which ones to choose, finally selecting 3: the woman with starry eyes, the upward-flowing river, and a self-portrait I'd done in secret. My face half hidden in shadow, my gaze defiant. The showcase was a month away, and I threw myself into preparing. I worked with Tara to frame my sketches, learning how to present them without losing their rawness. I juggled diner shifts classes and freelance gigs, my days bleeding into nights. Marisol came over to help me practice my artist statement, laughing when I stumbled over words like vulnerability and resilience. "Just say what you feel," she said. "That's enough." I wasn't sure it was, but I kept going. The night of the showcase, I stood in the community center. My sketches hung on a wall that felt too big for them. People milled around their voices, a low hum, and I wanted to hide. Tara found me, her smile wide. "You did this, Lila. Own it." I knotted my throat tight. As the evening wore on, strangers stopped to look at my work, some lingering longer than I expected. A few asked questions, their eyes curious, not judging. One woman, older with lines etched deep in her face, touched my arm and said, "This reminds me of when I left home." "Thank you." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded, my eyes burning. By the end of the night, 2 of my sketches had sold, not for much, but enough to feel real. Tara hugged me, saying, "This is just the start." I walked home under a sky, heavy with stars, my heart full, in a way I hadn't thought possible. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the girl who'd lost $30,000. I felt like Lila, the artist, the fighter, the woman who was enough. The high from the art showcase carried me for days, like a tide lifting a battered boat. I'd walk to the diner with a lightness in my step, humming songs I hadn't thought of in years. Marisol noticed, teasing me about my artist glow. "You're practically sparkling, Lila," she said, tossing a dish towel at me. I laughed, catching it, feeling for the first time in months, like I wasn't just surviving, but living. My sketches had found a place in the world, however small, and that gave me a kind of courage I hadn't known I could feel. But the wound from my family was still there, a bruise that ached when I pressed it. I'd see a mother and daughter sharing a milkshake at the diner, or hear a customer mention their brother, and the hurt would flare sharp and sudden. I threw myself into my art sketching whenever I had a spare moment. My tiny apartment became a chaotic studio, papers strewn across the floor, charcoal dust smudging the edges of my life. I drew women who were breaking free chains, snapping wings, unfolding faces, turned toward impossible skies. Each piece was a piece of me, a way to scream without opening my mouth. Tara kept in touch, sending me links to other art events, encouraging me to keep creating. "You've got something special," she texted. "Don't stop." Her belief in me was a lifeline, but it also scared me. What if I couldn't live up to it? What if this was just a fluke? School was a grind, but I was clawing my way back. I'd sit in the library until it closed, my laptop, glowing in the dark, rewriting essays and studying for exams. Ms. Carter, my advisor, noticed the change. "You're turning it around." "Lila," she said during a check-in, her eyes softening. "Keep it up." I nodded, but the pressure was immense. My scholarship was still at risk, and I couldn't afford to lose it. I started applying for more spending hours on applications, each one a plea for someone to see my worth. One caught my eye, a full-ride scholarship for women in the arts offered by a university in Seattle. The deadline was tight, and the requirements were daunting: a portfolio, a personal essay, and letters of recommendation. I didn't know if I could pull it off, but I had to try. Ruth was my biggest cheerleader. I'd show up at the bookstore. After long days, my hands stained with ink, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. She'd make tea and listen as I rambled about my fears, failing school, losing my scholarship, disappointing everyone who believed in me. "You're not here to be perfect," she said one night, her voice steady. "You're here to be you. That's enough." She offered to write one of my recommendation letters, and I nearly cried with gratitude. Marisol offered to proofread my essay, and Tara agreed to write another letter. I wasn't alone anymore, and that realization hit me like a wave. These women who owed me nothing saw something in me worth fighting for. The scholarship essay was the hardest part. I had to write about a challenge I'd overcome, and there was only one story that felt true. I sat at my wobbly kitchen table, a single bulb flickering overhead, and poured out the story of my parents and the $30,000. I wrote about the betrayal, the word ungrateful, that had carved itself into my heart the nights I'd cried myself to sleep. But I also wrote about the fight, how I'd kept going, how I'd found art, how I'd learned to stand up for myself. The words were raw, jagged, like broken glass. I rewrote it a dozen times, each draft cutting deeper. When I finally submitted it, I felt exposed, like I'd sent a piece of my soul into the world. Work at the diner was relentless. The holiday season was approaching, and the crowds were bigger, the tips better, but harder earned. I'd come home with sore feet and a pocket full of crumpled bills, counting them out like a ritual. My new savings account was growing $1 to $200 now, a number that felt both triumphant and pitiful compared to what I'd lost. I'd lie awake at night, calculating how long it would take to rebuild, how many shifts, how many gigs. But I wasn't just saving for a future anymore. I was saving for myself, for the Lila who refused to be erased. I hadn't heard from my parents in weeks, and the silence was a weight I carried everywhere. Part of me wanted to call, to scream, to demand they see what they'd done. But another part was afraid they'd dismiss me again, afraid I'd crumble under their indifference. Ethan sent another text, a vague apology that felt more like habit than sincerity. "I'm working on it, sis. I'll make it right." I didn't believe him. I'd stopped believing in his promises years ago, but the hurt still lingered, a knot in my chest that tightened when I thought of him. One evening, Tara invited me to a workshop at the Art Collective, a chance to network with other artists and learn about grants. I went nervous, wearing my best thrift store blouse, feeling like an imposter among people who seemed so sure of themselves. The room was filled with energy painters, sculptors, writers, all talking about their work with a passion that made my heart race. I met a woman named Priya, a photographer whose work captured the beauty in broken things. Cracked windows, peeling paint faces worn by time. We talked for hours, and when she asked about my art, I found myself opening up, describing the women. I drew the stories I wanted to tell. "You should apply for the Ellison grant," she said. "It's for emerging artists. You'd be perfect." I wrote down the details, my hands shaking with excitement and fear. The Ellison grant was a long-shot $10,000 for young artists to fund a project. I spent weeks preparing my application, working with Tara to refine my proposal. I wanted to create a series of large-scale drawings, each one telling a story of resilience inspired by the women in my life, Ruth, Marisol, Priya, even myself. I stayed up until dawn, sketching concepts, writing statements, pouring everything I had into it. When I submitted it, I felt a strange calm, like I'd laid down a burden I didn't know I was carrying. The Art Collective hosted another showcase, and this time I had 5 pieces on display. The room was packed, the air thick with chatter and wine. I stood by my work, my heart pounding, watching strangers study my sketches. A man in a tweed jacket bought one, saying it reminded him of his daughter. A young woman, maybe my age, stood in front of my self-portrait for a long time, her eyes wet. "This is me," she whispered, and I nodded, unable to speak. The night felt like a turning point, like I was stepping into a version of myself I'd only dreamed of. But the high didn't last. A week later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was different, softer, almost hesitant. "Lila, we need to talk," she said. "Can you come home?" My stomach twisted. I hadn't been back to Cloverdale since the betrayal, and the thought of facing them made me feel small again. Why I asked, my voice sharp. She sighed. "It's Ethan. He's in trouble again. And we miss you." The words "we miss you" felt like a hook, pulling at the part of me that still loved them. I wanted to say no to hang up, but something stopped me. "I'll think about it," I said, and ended the call. I didn't go. Instead, I went to the bookstore where Ruth was waiting with tea and a knowing look. I told her about the call, my voice shaking with anger and confusion. "What do I owe them?" I asked. "After everything, why do I still feel guilty?" She set down her cup, her eyes steady. "You don't owe them anything," she said, "but you owe yourself the truth. If you go, go for you, not them." Her words stayed with me, a compass in the storm. The next day, I got an email from the scholarship committee. My heart stopped as I opened it. I'd been shortlisted. They wanted me to come to Seattle for an interview. I read the email 3 times, waiting for it to sink in. This was real. This was mine. I called Marisol, who screamed so loudly, I had to hold the phone away from my ear. I told Ruth, who hugged me until I couldn't breathe. For the first time, I felt like I was running towards something, not just away. The email from the scholarship committee was a spark that set my world alight. I read it over and over, the words, shortlisted, glowing like a promise. Seattle felt like a dream, a city of glass and rain, far from the suffocating weight of Cloverdale. I'd never been, but I imagined walking its streets, my portfolio under my arm, my future unfolding like one of my sketches. The interview was in 2 weeks, and I threw myself into preparing. I stayed up late, refining my portfolio, practicing answers to questions I thought they might ask. "Why do you deserve this?" I'd say, to my cracked bathroom mirror, my voice wavering. The truth was, I wasn't sure I did, but I wanted to believe I could. Marisol was my rock. She'd come over after her shifts, sprawled on my couch, quizzing me on art theory, or making me laugh with her terrible impressions of pretentious gallery types. "Lila, you're gonna walk in there and own it," she said one night, tossing a chip at me. "They won't know what hit 'em." I smiled, but the doubt was still there, a shadow that followed me everywhere. What if they saw through me? What if they realized I was just a girl from a small town, scraping by, pretending she belonged to Ruth? Helped me polish my presentation. We'd sit in the bookstore, surrounded by stacks of novels, as she read my essay drafts and offered gentle critiques. "Don't hide your pain," she said. "It's what makes your work real." I nodded, rewriting, until the words felt like they could bleed. She also helped me pick out an outfit for the interview, a second-hand blazer, and a simple dress, the kind of thing that said artist without trying too hard. When I tried it on, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone who had a future. The diner was busier than ever, the holiday rush in full swing. I'd weave through tables, balancing trays of coffee and pie, my mind half on Seattle. My coworkers noticed the change in me. "You're smiling more," one said, a guy named Javier, who always snuck me extra fries. I shrugged, but it was true. The possibility of the scholarship had given me something to hold onto, a rope to pull myself out of the dark. My savings account was up to $1,800, and I'd booked a cheap bus ticket to Seattle. Every penny was accounted for, every shift a step closer to my goal. I still hadn't responded to my mother's call. Her words, "We miss you," echoed in my head, but they were tangled with the memory of Ungrateful, of the $30,000 they'd taken without a second thought. I wanted to believe they meant it, but I couldn't trust them. Not yet. Ethan hadn't texted again, and I was glad. His apologies were like rain on a window, temporary, leaving no trace. I focused on what I could control: my art, my studies, the interview. Tara invited me to another art collective event, this time a panel discussion on breaking into the industry. I went clutching a notebook, soaking up every word. The speakers were intimidating, established artists with gallery shows and grants. But their stories weren't so different from mine. They'd faced rejection, doubt, families who didn't understand. One, a sculptor named Marcus, said, "Your art is your voice. Don't let anyone silence it." I wrote it down, my hand shaking. That night, I sketched a woman with a mouthful of stars, her voice spilling out in light. It was one of my best pieces yet. A week before the interview, I got another email. I'd won a small local art grant, $2,000 to fund a project. It wasn't the Ellison grant, but it was real money validation that my work mattered. I cried when I read the email, sitting on my kitchen floor, the linoleum cold against my legs. I called Ruth first, then Marisol, their cheers, filling the empty spaces in my heart. The grant meant I could buy better supplies, maybe even rent a tiny studio space someday. It meant I was more than the girl who'd lost everything. The day of the Seattle trip arrived gray and drizzly. I boarded the bus with my portfolio and a backpack, my stomach in knots. The ride was long, the scenery blurring into a wash of green and mist. I listened to music, trying to calm my nerves, but my mind kept spinning. What if I froze? What if they asked about my family? I hadn't told anyone in Seattle about my parents, about the betrayal. It was too raw, too personal. But I knew it was part of my story, part of why my art was what it was. The interview was held in a sleek university building, all glass and sharp angles. I felt small walking in my thrift store blazer, no match for the polished students around me. The panel was 3 professors, their faces kind, but unreadable. They asked about my portfolio, my influences, my goals. I talked about my sketches, how they came from pain, but reached for hope. I mentioned Ruth Marisol, the art collective people who'd seen me when I felt invisible. Then one professor, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, asked, "What drives you, Lila? What's the fire in your work?" I froze. The truth was too big, too messy. But I thought of Ruth's words, "Don't hide your pain." So I told them. Not everything, but enough. I told them about working 2 jobs, about saving for a future I believed in, about losing it all to family who didn't see my worth. I told them how art had saved me, how every sketch was a fight to be seen. My voice shook, and I thought I'd ruined it, but when I looked up, the woman was nodding, her eyes soft. "Thank you for your honesty," she said. The others asked a few more questions, and then it was over. I left the room, my legs trembling, feeling like I'd left a piece of myself behind. The bus ride home was quiet, my mind replaying every word. I didn't know if I'd done enough, but I'd been honest, and that was something. When I got back to Portland, Marisol was waiting at my apartment with takeout and a bottle of cheap wine. "You're a badass," she said, raising a glass. I laughed, but my heart was still in Seattle, waiting for an answer. A week later, the email came. I was in the diner wiping down tables when my phone buzzed. I opened it, my hands shaking, and read the first line. "Congratulations, Lila. I'd won the scholarship, full ride 4 years starting in the fall." I dropped the rag, my vision blurring with tears. Marisol saw me and ran over screaming when I told her. The other servers clapped, customers staring, but I didn't care. This was mine. I'd fought for it, and I'd won. I called Ruth, who cried with me, her voice thick with pride. I told Tara, who insisted on throwing a celebration at the collective. That night, I stood in my apartment, staring at the acceptance letter on my laptop screen. I felt like the woman in my sketches, the one reaching for the horizon. But the joy was bittersweet. I wanted to share it with my family, to hear my mother's laugh, my father's quiet, "Well done." But they were a world away, separated by more than miles. The next day, I got a voicemail from my mother. "Lila, please," she said, her voice breaking. "Come home, we need you." I listened to it 3 times, my finger hovering over the call button. Part of me wanted to go to see if they'd changed, if they could see me now. But another part was afraid of falling back into the role of the good daughter, the one who sacrificed everything. I didn't call back. Instead, I went to the bookstore where Ruth was waiting. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small. She took my hand. "You decide, Lila. Not them, you." I started preparing for Seattle, packing up my life in Portland. The scholarship included a small stipend enough to rent a room near campus. I'd keep working, keep sketching, keep building. The Ellison grant results were still pending, but I wasn't waiting for it. I was moving forward one step at a time. My art was growing, my voice stronger. I wasn't the girl who'd lost $30,000 anymore. I was Lila, the artist, the scholar, the woman who was enough. The news of the scholarship was like a door swinging open, letting light into a room I'd kept dark for too long. I walked through Portland with a new kind of energy, noticing details I'd missed before: the way rain glistened on cobblestones, the laughter of strangers spilling from coffee shops, the soft hum of the city waking up. I was 24, and for the first time I felt like my life was mine to shape. The scholarship meant Seattle, a fresh start, a chance to study art in a way I'd only dreamed of. But it also meant leaving behind the fragile world I'd built: Marisol's laughter, Ruth's quiet wisdom, the art collective's chaotic energy. I wasn't just moving to a new city, I was stepping into a new version of myself, and that was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. I spent the summer preparing. The scholarship covered tuition and a small stipend, but I'd need to work to afford rent and supplies. I picked up extra shifts at the diner, my apron a second skin, my hands moving on autopilot as I poured coffee and cleared plates. Marisol was relentless, planning a send-off party that sounded more like a festival. "You're not sneaking off to Seattle without a proper goodbye," she said, pinning me with a look. I laughed, but the thought of leaving her made my chest ache. She'd been my anchor, the one who'd seen me at my lowest and never looked away. Ruth was helping me pack her bookstore a haven, as always. We'd sit among the shelves, folding my clothes into boxes, her hands steady while mine shook. "You're not leaving me," she said one evening, catching my eye. "You're carrying me with you, all of us." I knotted my throat tight. She gave me a gift, a leather-bound sketchbook, its pages thick and creamy, the kind I'd never buy for myself. "Fill it with your truth," she said. I hugged her, breathing in the scent of lavender and old books, trying to memorize the feel of her presence. The art collective was buzzing with summer events, and Tara kept me busy. She'd secured a spot for me in a group exhibition, my biggest yet, with galleries and curators attending. "This is your moment, Lila," she said, her purple-streaked hair catching the light. "Show them who you are." I worked on new pieces, larger and bolder than before. I drew women who were storms, hair like lightning eyes, like thunderclouds' hands that could shatter stone. Each sketch was a declaration: I am here, I matter. The exhibition was a whirlwind, crowded loud with wine glasses clinking and voices overlapping. My pieces hung on a white wall, lit by soft spotlights, and I stood beside them, my heart pounding. People stopped, lingered, asked questions. A gallery owner, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a silk scarf, bought one of my drawings on the spot. "You have a voice," she said. "Keep using it." I nodded, too stunned to speak. The Ellison grant results came a week later. I was at the diner scrubbing a sticky table when my phone buzzed. I opened the email, my breath catching. I'd won $10,000 to create my Resilience series, plus a mentorship with a renowned artist. I read the email twice, then ran to the break room, tears streaming down my face. Marisol found me, and when I told her, she screamed, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. "You're unstoppable, Lila," she said. I called Ruth, who laughed and cried at the same time. Tara texted me a string of emojis and a promise to celebrate. The grant was more than money. It was proof that my story, my pain, my fight had value. I started planning this series' sketching concepts in Ruth's gift book. I wanted each piece to honor a woman who'd shaped me: Ruth's quiet strength, Marisol's fierce loyalty, Priya's ability to find beauty in brokenness, my own refusal to give up. I worked late into the night, my apartment a mess of charcoal and coffee mugs, my hands smudged with ink. The process was healing each line, a way to reclaim the parts of myself I'd lost. I wasn't just creating art, I was creating myself. My parents' voicemail lingered in my mind, a shadow I couldn't shake. I hadn't called back, but their silence was louder than ever. Part of me wanted to tell them about the scholarship, the grant, the exhibition, to make them see what I'd become despite them. But another part was afraid they'd diminish it, turn my victories into something small. I talked to Ruth about it one night, my voice raw. "What if they never see me?" I asked. She set down her tea, her eyes steady. "Then you see yourself," she said. "That's what matters?" Her words were a knife cutting through my doubt. I didn't need their approval. I never had. Seattle was drawing closer, and I found a tiny room to rent near campus, a shared house with other students. I packed my life into a few boxes: clothes, books, my sketchbooks, a photo of me and Marisol at the diner. The move felt like shedding a skin, leaving behind the Lila who'd been betrayed, the one who'd cried herself to sleep. I was scared, but I was ready. The night before I left, Marisol threw her party at the art collective. The room was packed: Tara, Priya, Ruth, even Javier from the diner. There was music, cheap wine, and a cake with "Go Conquer Seattle, Lila" scrawled in messy icing. Marisol gave a speech, her voice breaking, as she called me her sister. Ruth handed me a small pendant, a silver star on a chain. "For the woman who reaches," she said. I wore it, my fingers tracing its edges, feeling their love settle into my bones. The bus to Seattle was crowded, the air thick with the smell of diesel and damp coats. I sat by the window, watching Portland fade into the distance, my sketchbook open on my lap. I drew the skyline, all sharp edges and soft lights, a city that had held me when I was falling apart. The ride was long, but I didn't mind. I was moving towards something, not running away. When I arrived, Seattle was everything I'd imagined: rain-slick streets, towering buildings, a pulse that felt alive. My new housemates were kind, a mix of artists and nerds, and my room was small but mine. I hung my sketches on the walls, a reminder of who I was. Classes started a week later, and the university was overwhelming. Sprawling, vibrant, filled with people who seemed to know exactly where they were going. I was older than most freshmen, but I didn't care. I threw myself into my courses, drawing, art, history, design, each one a chance to grow. My professors were tough but inspiring, pushing me to dig deeper, to take risks. I started working on the Ellison Grant series, meeting with my mentor, a painter named Elena, who'd shown in galleries across the world. "Your work is raw," she said, studying my sketches. "That's your strength. Don't polish it away." I nodded, determined to prove her right. I got a part-time job at a campus cafe, steaming milk and wiping counters. My hands always smudged with charcoal. The tips were decent, and my savings grew: $3,000, now a number that felt like a shield. I didn't hear from my parents, and I didn't reach out. The distance between us was a choice, one I made every day. But I thought of them sometimes, especially at night, when the city was quiet and my mind wandered. I wondered if they knew what they'd lost, if they ever regretted it. I hoped they did, and then I hated myself for hoping. The art scene in Seattle was electric, and I dove in. I joined a student art group, showed my work at small galleries, connected with other young artists. My resilience series was taking shape, each piece a story, a scar, a victory. I drew Ruth as a woman of stone and starlight, Marisol as a blaze of color, Priya as a shadow weaving light. My self-portrait was last a woman with eyes like horizons, her hands full of broken chains. I worked on it in secret, pouring everything I had into it. When I finished, I stood back, my heart racing. It was me, not the girl I'd been, but the woman I was becoming. I was standing taller now, my voice steadier. People noticed: classmates, professors, strangers at galleries. "You've got something," a curator told me at a student show. "Don't lose it." I smiled, thinking of the pendant around my neck, the star that reminded me to reach. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving, and the world was starting to see it. Seattle wrapped around me like a second skin, its rain-soaked streets and humming energy becoming as familiar as my own heartbeat. I was 25 now, a year into my program at the university, and the world felt bigger, brighter, but no less daunting. My classes were a whirlwind studio sessions that stretched into the night lectures that sparked ideas. I couldn't wait to sketch critiques that left me raw, but stronger. I was learning to trust my voice, to let my art speak without apology. The Resilience series for the Ellison Grant was nearly complete, each piece a testament to the women who'd carried me through my darkest days. I'd pour myself into them, my hands smudged with charcoal, my heart laid bare on the canvas. The mentorship with Elena was intense. She'd push me to dig deeper, to strip away anything that wasn't true. "Your work is a mirror," she said once, her eyes sharp. "Make sure it reflects you." My job at the campus cafe kept me grounded, the rhythm of steaming milk and wiping counters, a counterpoint to the chaos of my art. I'd chat with customers, mostly students like me, their faces a blur of dreams and exhaustion. My savings were up to $5,000, a number that felt like a small victory, each dollar a brick in the wall I was rebuilding. I lived frugally, sharing a house with 3 other artists who filled the space with music and half-finished paintings. We'd stay up late, debating color theory, or laughing over cheap wine, and I'd feel a warmth I hadn't known in Cloverdale. These were my people, not by blood, but by choice. The art scene was my oxygen. I showed my work at student galleries, local cafes, even a pop-up event in a warehouse by the waterfront. My sketches were bolder now, less about pain and more about power. I drew women who were mountains, rivers, skies, uncontainable, undeniable. People started recognizing my name, not just as the scholarship girl, but as Lila the artist with something to say. A local magazine featured my series in a small write-up, calling my work hauntingly fierce. I kept the clipping taped to my wall next to Ruth's star pendant, which I still wore every day. It was a reminder of how far I'd come and how much further I wanted to go. But the past was never far away. I hadn't spoken to my parents in over a year, and their silence was a weight I carried like a stone in my pocket. I'd see families at the cafe, parents visiting their kids, and feel a pang so sharp it stole my breath. I didn't miss Cloverdale, but I missed the idea of family, the version I'd once believed in, where love didn't come with a price. Ethan hadn't reached out again, and I was glad. His promises were ghosts fading the moment they were spoken. I'd stopped waiting for him to make things right. The $30,000 was gone, a wound that had scabbed over but never fully healed. Marisol and Ruth kept me tethered to Portland. Marisol would call, her voice crackling through my ancient phone, filling me in on diner gossip or her latest dating disasters. "You're killing it up there, Lila," she'd say, and I could hear her grin. Ruth sent letters handwritten on bookstore stationery, each one a quiet anchor. "You're writing your own story," she wrote once. "Don't let anyone else hold the pen." I'd read them late at night, my room lit by a single lamp, and feel their love across the miles. Tara emailed too, sharing updates on the collective, inviting me to show my work if I ever came back. They were my roots, and Seattle was where I was growing. The Ellison Grant series was set to debut at a university gallery, a big deal for a student. Elena helped me prepare her feedback, brutal but fair. "Don't shy away from the edges," she said, pointing to a sketch of Marisol. "Let her burn." I reworked it, making the colors fiercer, the lines sharper. The gallery was a sleek space, all white walls and soft lighting, and seeing my work there felt surreal. The opening was packed, students, professors, local artists, even a few curators. I wore a black dress I'd found at a thrift store, Ruth's pendant glinting at my throat, and stood by my pieces, my heart racing. People lingered, their faces thoughtful, some wiping tears. A woman my age with a shaved head and a nose ring told me my self-portrait made her feel seen. "It's like you drew my soul," she said, I knotted my throat tight, thinking of the nights I'd spent drawing to survive. The series was a success. The university posted about it online, and the magazine that had featured me ran another piece this time with photos. A small gallery in Seattle offered to show my work the following spring, and Elena hinted at connections to bigger venues. I was dizzy with it, the sense that my art was rippling outward, touching lives I'd never know. But success didn't erase the doubt. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was good enough, if this was all a fluke. Elena saw it in me. "You're allowed to be scared," she said during a mentorship session. "Just don't let it stop you." I started getting invites to speak small panels student events once at a women's art conference. I was nervous, my voice shaking as I shared my story, the betrayal, the loss, the fight to rebuild. But people listened. They'd come up after sharing their own stories of family, of being underestimated, of clawing their way back. "You're inspiring," a girl told me at the conference, her eyes bright. I didn't feel inspiring. I felt like Lila, still figuring it out, still carrying the weight of Ungrateful. But I smiled because maybe inspiring was just being honest. One day I got an email from a Cloverdale address. My heart stopped thinking it was my parents. It wasn't. It was Mrs. Delaney, my high school art teacher, someone I hadn't thought of in years. She'd seen the magazine article and wanted to congratulate me. "I always knew you had it in you," she wrote. "Come back and talk to my students sometime. They need to see someone like you." I stared at the email memories flooding back her classroom, the smell of paint, the way she'd slip me extra supplies when she knew I couldn't afford them. I wrote back promising to visit, my hands trembling. Cloverdale felt like a foreign country, but Mrs. Delaney's words were a bridge. I went a month later on a weekend trip. The drive was long, the Oregon landscape unfolding in greens and grays, my stomach twisting as I neared my hometown. I didn't tell my parents I was coming. I wasn't ready to face them. Mrs. Delaney met me at the school, her hair grayer, but her smile the same. The students were shy at first, their eyes wide, as I showed them my sketches and told my story, not all of it, but enough. "You don't need permission to be great," I said, echoing Ruth. A girl in the back, with braces and a sketchbook clutched to her chest, asked how I kept going when it hurt. I paused, thinking of the $30,000 of my parents' voices, of the nights I'd wanted to give up. "You keep going because you're worth it," I said. She nodded, and I hoped she believed me. I left Cloverdale without seeing my family, but the visit shifted something in me. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing my path, and it didn't have to include them. Back in Seattle, I threw myself into my work with new fire. My gallery show was approaching, and I was creating new pieces, experimenting with color and scale. I drew a woman who was a city, her skyline jagged, but glowing, her heart a star. It was me, or who I was becoming. Elena saw it and smiled. "This is it, Lila," she said. "This is you." I was standing taller, my voice clearer. People noticed, classmates, curators, strangers who saw my work. I wasn't just an artist now. I was a force, someone who'd taken her pain and made it sing. The world was opening up, and I was ready to meet it. Star pendant and all. The gallery show in Seattle was the kind of moment I'd once thought belonged to other people. Those with confidence connections lives unmarred by betrayal. But there I was, 25, standing in a sleek downtown space, my sketches lining the walls like pieces of my soul hung out to dry. The room was alive with chatter-clinking glasses and the soft hum of jazz, but I felt like I was underwater, every sound muffled by the pounding of my heart. My pieces, women of storms and stars, cities, with beating hearts, glowed under the spotlights, each one a story of survival. I wore a simple black dress, Ruth's star pendant warm against my skin, and tried to look like I belonged. Elena was there, her presence a quiet anchor, her nod of approval worth more than any sale. "This is your night, Lila," she whispered. "Own it." The crowd was bigger than I'd expected. Local artists, curators, students, even a few collectors in sharp suits. People lingered by my work, their faces thoughtful, some whispering to each other, others standing alone, lost in the lines of my charcoal. A woman with gray curls and a velvet shawl bought my city woman sketch, saying it reminded her of her daughter's strength. A young man, maybe a student, stood in front of my self-portrait for so long. I thought he'd forgotten to move. "This is power," he said, turning to me, his eyes bright. I knotted my throat tight, unsure how to carry the weight of their words. By the end of the night, 4 pieces had sold, and a curator from a bigger gallery approached me, handing me her card. "Let's talk," she said. "You're going somewhere." I tucked the card into my pocket, my hands trembling, feeling like I'd stepped into a life I wasn't sure I deserved. The show made waves. A local art blog wrote about it, calling my work a raw, unflinching cry of resilience. The university shared the article online, and my inbox filled with messages, congratulations from classmates, inquiries from small galleries, even a request to speak at a regional art symposium. I was dazed walking through my days, like I was dreaming with my eyes open. My cafe job felt smaller now, the routine of steaming milk and wiping counters. A strange contrast to the world opening around me. My savings were at $7,000 a number that once seemed impossible, each dollar, a reminder that I'd rebuilt what my parents had taken, piece by piece. Marisol flew up for a weekend, her laughter filling my tiny room as we ate takeout on the floor. She'd seen the blog post and demanded every detail, her eyes wide, as I showed her photos from the show. "Lila, you're a freaking star," she said, hugging me until I laughed. Ruth sent a letter, her handwriting steady. "You're shining, and I'm not surprised." Tara emailed joking that Portland was jealous of Seattle's new art darling. Their pride was a warmth I carried everywhere, a shield against the doubt that still crept in at night, whispering that I was a fraud, that this wouldn't last. The symposium was my next leap. It was held in a conference center in Tacoma, all glass and polished wood, with artists and academics from across the Northwest. I was invited to speak on a panel about emerging voices, and the thought made my stomach twist. I wasn't a speaker, I was just Lila, the girl who'd lost $30,000 and turned her pain into art. But Elna coached me, her voice firm. "You're not just telling your story," she said. "You're giving others permission to tell theirs." I wrote my speech in the sketchbook Ruth had given me, rewriting until the words felt true. I talked about growing up in Cloverdale, about family expectations, about losing everything, and finding art as a lifeline. I didn't mention my parents by name, but the betrayal was there, woven into every sentence. The panel was packed, the room buzzing with anticipation. I sat between a sculptor and a poet, my hands clammy, Ruth's pendant, a steady weight at my throat. When it was my turn, I stood, my voice shaking at first, but growing stronger. I told them about the $30,000, about being called ungrateful, about sketching to survive. I told them about Ruth Marisol, the women who'd seen me when I was invisible. The room was silent, their faces a blur of empathy and awe. When I finished, the applause was loud, but it was the people who approached me. After that stayed with me, women mostly sharing stories of their own betrayals, their own fights. "You made me feel less alone," one said, her voice breaking. I hugged her, my eyes burning, thinking of the girl I'd been crying on her thrift store couch. The symposium was recorded, and a clip of my speech went viral, not millions of views, but enough to spread. People shared it, tagging me, calling me an inspiration. A small TV station in Seattle reached out wanting to feature me in a segment about young artists. I agreed, nervous but determined. The interview was in a bright studio, the host a woman with a warm smile, who asked about my journey. I told her the truth, or as much of it as I could fit into 10 minutes. The segment aired a week later, and my phone exploded messages from strangers, old classmates, even Mrs. Delaney, who said her students had watched it in class. "You're their hero," she wrote. I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like Lila, still carrying the weight of her past, but lighter now, like she could breathe. I didn't know my parents had seen the segment until I got a letter. It was in my mother's handwriting, postmarked from Cloverdale, waiting in my mailbox like a bomb. I stood in the hallway of my shared house, the paper trembling in my hands, afraid to open it. I took it to my room, sat on my bed, and read. "Lila," it began. "We saw you on TV. We didn't know." The rest was a mix of apology and defense, sorry for hurting me. But they'd done it for Ethan, for the family, because they thought it was right. They wrote about his gambling, how he was in rehab now, how they were struggling to keep the store. They asked me to come home to talk, to be their daughter again. "We're proud of you," they wrote, and those words cut deeper than anything else. Proud. After everything they dared to claim that, I didn't cry. I folded the letter and put it in a drawer, my hands steady, but my heart racing. I wanted to scream, to drive to Cloverdale, and demand they explain how they could be proud now, after dismissing me then. But I didn't. I went to the studio instead, sketching until dawn, drawing a woman with a heart of broken glass, her hands stitching it back together. The anger was there, but so was something new, clarity. I didn't need their pride. I had my own. A month later, I was invited to a gallery opening in Portland, a chance to show new work and reconnect with Tara's collective. I went Ruth's pendant around my neck, my portfolio, heavier now with pieces that felt like triumphs. The opening was crowded, the air thick with wine and perfume. Tara hugged me, her purple hair brighter than ever, and introduced me to everyone as the one who got away. I laughed, but my eyes kept scanning the room, half expecting to see my parents. They didn't come, but someone else did, Ethan. He was thinner, his eyes tired, but clear standing. By my self-portrait, like he didn't know what to say. I froze, my heart pounding, the room fading around us. "Lila," he said, his voice soft. "I saw you on TV. I'm sorry." I stared at him, the boy who'd taken everything and called it nothing. "You're sorry," I said, my voice sharp. "You let them take my future, Ethan. You let them call me ungrateful." He flinched, but he didn't look away. "I know," he said. "I was drowning. I didn't see you. But I'm trying now. I'm clean. I want to make it right." I wanted to believe him, but the wound was too deep. "I don't need you to make it right," I said. "I did that myself." He nodded, his eyes wet, and left without another word. I stood there trembling, but not broken. The crowd moved around me, oblivious, and I felt a strange peace. I'd faced him, and I was still standing. Tara found me, her arm around my shoulders. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded, my eyes on my self-portrait, the woman with horizon eyes. "I'm more than okay," I said, and I meant it. The Portland gallery opening lingered in my mind, like a photograph, sharp and vivid, as I rode the bus back to Seattle. Ethan's face, worn but earnest, stayed with me. His apology hanging in the air like smoke I couldn't quite clear. I didn't hate him, not anymore, but I didn't trust him either. His words, "I'm trying now," were too late. A bandage on a wound that had already scarred. I leaned my head against the bus window, the glass cool against my skin, and watched the world blur past trees, heavy with rain lights, smearing into streaks of gold. My sketchbook lay open on my lap, but I didn't draw. I just sat, letting the weight of the night settle, feeling the star pendant at my throat, a quiet reminder of Ruth's belief in me. I was 25, an artist, a scholar, a woman who'd built herself from the ashes of betrayal. And yet, the letter from my parents, still tucked in my drawer, tugged at me, a thread I hadn't yet cut. Back in Seattle, life moved fast. My classes were demanding, my professors pushing me to refine my craft, to take risks that scared me. I was experimenting with mixed media now, layering charcoal with acrylic weaving, in scraps of fabric and paper, old receipts, torn pages, pieces of my past. My Resilience series had evolved into something new, a collection I called Unbound, each piece, a woman breaking free from something, chains, shadows, expectations. The gallery that had shown my work was planning a solo exhibition for me in the spring, a prospect that thrilled and terrified me. Elena was relentless, her feedback sharp but generous. "You're not just making art," she said during a studio session. Her eyes on a half-finished piece. You're rewriting your story. Don't hold back. I nodded, my hands smudged with paint, determined to live up to her faith. The TV segment had opened doors I hadn't expected. I was invited to more panels, more interviews, even a guest lecture at a community college. People wanted to hear my story. The girl who'd lost $30,000, who'd been called ungrateful, who'd turned her pain into art that made others feel seen. I was better at speaking, now my voice steadier, though my hands still shook before every event. I'd stand at podiums, Ruth's pendant, glinting under stage lights, and talk about resilience, about choosing yourself when no one else does. Audiences listened, their faces, a mix of empathy and awe, and afterward they'd share their own stories, mothers who'd dismissed them, siblings who'd taken too much dreams they'd had to rebuild. "You're so strong," they'd say, and I'd smile, thinking of the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the doubt that still whispered in the dark. Strength wasn't the absence of pain, it was walking through it. My savings were at $9,000, a number that felt like a quiet triumph. I worked at the cafe, picked up freelance design gigs, sold a few sketches through the gallery. Every dollar was a choice, a refusal to let my past define me. My housemates were my family now, messy, loud always, stealing my coffee, but showing up when it mattered. We'd host art nights, crowding into our tiny living room, critiquing each other's work over cheap pizza. They called me the famous one after the TV segment, teasing but proud. I laughed, but the attention was heavy. I wasn't famous, I was Lila, still figuring out how to carry the spotlight without burning. Marisol visited again, her energy a burst of sunlight in Seattle's gray. She'd quit the diner and was taking night classes, dreaming of becoming a social worker. "You inspired me," she said, sprawled on my bed, eating my snacks. "Watching you fight made me want to fight too." I blinked, stunned, not used to being anyone's reason. We walked the city, her arm linked with mine, laughing until we couldn't breathe. Ruth wrote every week, her letters a steady pulse. "You're not just surviving," she wrote. "You're soaring." I kept her letters in a box under my bed, next to the sketchbook she'd given me, now nearly full. Tara sent updates on the collective, hinting at a collaboration if I ever moved back. They were my anchors, proof that love didn't have to hurt. The letter from my parents was a shadow I couldn't ignore. I'd read it a dozen times, each word a knife, sorry but not enough. Proud but too late. I didn't know what I owed them, if anything. Ruth's words echoed, "You decide, Lila, not them." I wanted to let go, to cut the thread, but part of me still loved them, the mother who'd once braided my hair, the father who'd taught me to fix a shelf, the brother who'd made me laugh before he broke me. I didn't know how to reconcile that love with the pain, so I carried both a weight that was mine to bear. The solo exhibition was set for April, and I was deep in preparation, working late in the university studio, the air thick with the smell of paint and turpentine. My Unbound series was ambitious, 10 large pieces, each one a woman claiming her space. I drew Ruth as a woman of roots and wings, Marisol as a fire that warmed, instead of burned, myself as a figure of light and shadow, my hands full of stars. The gallery curator, a woman named Claire with a sharp eye and a kind smile, was excited. "This could be big, Lila," she said. "People are talking about you." I nodded, my stomach twisting, afraid of the height I was climbing. A week before the exhibition, I got an email from Mrs. Delaney. She'd organized an art showcase in Cloverdale, inspired by my visit, and wanted me to be the guest of honor. "Your story matters here," she wrote. "Come home, home." The word felt like a foreign language. I didn't want to go, but I thought of the girl with braces clutching her sketchbook, and I said yes. I drove down the familiar roads, stirring memories. I'd tried to bury the hardware store, the bakery, the house, where I'd hidden my dreams in a shoebox. I stayed with Mrs. Delaney, avoiding my parents' street, my heart pounding every time I saw a familiar face. The showcase was small but warm, held in the school gym, student art covering the walls. I spoke to a crowd of kids, parents, teachers, my voice steady, as I shared my journey, not the polished version, but the messy one with tears and rage and redemption. The girl with braces was there, her sketchbook still clutched tight. "I'm applying to art school," she whispered after. "Because of you." I hugged her, my eyes wet, thinking of the Lila who'd needed someone to say she was enough. I didn't expect my parents to come, but they did. I saw them in the back. My mother's face lined my father's eyes, downcast. Ethan wasn't there, and I was glad. When I finished speaking, they approached the crowd, parting around us. Lila, my mother, said, her voice breaking, "We're so sorry." My father nodded, his hands in his pockets. "We didn't know how to fix it," he said. "We were wrong." I stood there, Ruth's pendant heavy at my throat, and felt the weight of their words. They were ashamed. I could see it, their daughter, once invisible, now a name they couldn't ignore. But their apology didn't erase the past. It didn't give me back the $30, the trust, the years of feeling less. "I'm glad you're sorry." I said, my voice calm but firm. "But I don't need you to be proud of me. I'm proud of myself." My mother's eyes filled with tears, my father's face crumpling. They didn't argue, didn't defend. They just nodded, and I walked away, my heart aching but whole. I didn't forgive them, not yet, maybe not ever, but I let go. I let go of the need for their validation, the hope that they'd make it right. My worth wasn't theirs to define. The exhibition in Seattle was a triumph. The gallery was packed, my Unbound series glowing under the lights. People cried, clapped, bought pieces. Claire introduced me to curators from New York, Chicago, places I'd never dared to dream of. I spoke to the crowd, my voice clear, telling them about the women who'd shaped me, about the star pendant that reminded me to reach. "Your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation," I said, and the room erupted in applause. I felt like the women in my sketches, unbound, unstoppable enough. I didn't know what came next, more shows, more cities, maybe even forgiveness. But I knew I'd carry Ruth's Star Marisol's fire, my own light. I'd keep sketching, keep fighting, keep choosing myself. And that was enough.